Okay, now it's going. Right.
And the recording?
And now that's going to.
Got it.
Good.
Thank you.
And I will get the barking dogs taken care of.
Don't worry. This is John Kruger, President of the Essex Valley Library District Board of Trustees. It is May the 6th, 6:30 p.m. And this is our monthly study session. And we have the entire board with the exception of Beth Ellis with us. In addition, Ann Finley and Susan Miller from Friends and Foundation, and staff, Cindy Seckman and Claudine Perot, and advisor to the board, Bill Garrett. Thank you all for being present. Tonight's discussion is around our 10-year financial planning, and I will turn it over to Treasurer David Hemphill to start off. David?
All right, thank you, John. I thought we'd have a good attendance for a scintillating topic like this, so thank you all for being here. I'm going to read a little bit from my notes to give a little background on this and move forward into a discussion. So I will start with, per the library's financial management policies, number 2 of those policies is the district strategic financial plan. It states the board shall establish, in consultation with the director, a 10-year strategic financial plan and shall review it annually. So we need to do this just for our due diligence of the policy set. And let me start with a little bit of history, especially for our new members. And John, Claudine, you were the ones there real time, so correct me as necessary on this. But in 2013, a financial action plan was developed by a committee of consisting of Claudine, Don Bryson, and Marjorie Hancock to decide potential funding needs of the library and timing of the requesting the additional funding needed for those needs via a tax increase vote. A 10-year strategic financial plan was developed as a tool for estimating those future needs and to provide support for a proposed mill levy increase vote. Projections were based on the current year, 2013 revenue and expenditures. And at the time, they used the Consumer Price Index review and came up with a 2% expenditure inflation factor built in to that plan. The personnel salary increases were based on comparable peer libraries. They also used the most recent available facilities audit for those projections. And that is what we still currently use for those projections. The plan also was used to project reserve funding needs also. So now the forecast reliability of plans like this may vary the further out in time the projection, but is really a valuable resource for us to keep the focus on the task of governing for the future. It may help prepare for problems rather than needing to react to problems. It can also be used by the board to, lost my thing. It may also be used by the board to provide guidance to the director for future departmental funding projects and needs. So for today, the agenda really is to provide guidance to the Finance Committee on the parameters for the revenue projections and expenditure increases need to complete our 10-year plan. We've discussed it thoroughly, but we really need the board not only to be aware of what we're doing, but also to have opportunity to input on this plan. The current sources of funding will need to be guesstimated. These include property tax estimates. Given the passage of Gallagher repeal last year, this is a little bit simpler task, or a little less volatile, shall I say, task. It was something that we backed as a board, and we're happy to see that was repealed. The specific ownership tax has been a boon in recent years, but will it continue? Miscellaneous revenue, investment interest, and other fees are just that. And Kay will discuss our investment interest sources and options that we've been discussing in our Finance Committee. The Friends and Foundation will provide insight as available on their current projections to complete this picture. Their projections are almost 10% of our budget and a substantial consideration. As Claudine pointed out, the employee salary study is still in progress, but it is the largest part of the budget every year, and it's about 65% of the 2021 budget. But Claudine said, that is for next month's meeting. Also, on the board's collective opinion, what is the non-personnel expenditure inflation factor we should consider? 2% was used based on the consumer price index at the time, but that only met what was considered meeting inflation needs for the projections. Is that what the board wants to continue with or not? That's something we want to discuss. Occasionally major projects are initiated, like the second floor renovation a few years back. But for that, account can be to provide that funding, and probably can be assumed that would be the way it would be in the similar scenario in the future on that. So with that little bit of background, I propose we will move into a discussion. We can start with the property tax, which is the largest part of our budget, obvious. And I will ask everyone, are you surprised that the economy has sustained in the last year as well as it has? Home values seem to have been skyrocketing, but the valuation notices are just now being received. I don't know if anyone else has received those. I thought my increase was more modest than expected with the climate that went on, but I'm not completely familiar with how current recent sales they use and things like that. Cindy, is that something you know? What do they use recent sales up to? Is it last June 30th or?
It's supposed to be last year, July, as of June 30th or the 1st of July, I believe. That's according to the statement I received. If you do your contest, then that's what you're supposed to do, is your property value as of that date.
Okay. Again, I was a little surprised that ours had about a 3.5% increase, which is enough for me, but I was surprised with the economy. So I guess the only way to handle this is to go around and specifically ask folks, are they in agreement with what the finance committee will do with projecting right now? In the past, we've used tools like the Excel forecast tool, but we had, a consistent past to use for that. John, maybe because of your experience, I can even start with you.
Okay.
You've been involved in this intimately for a number of years, so.
Right. When back to the 2013 initial spreadsheeting that Don Bryson did, income was carried flat out for the 10 years. He had no increase projections at all. Felt that they really didn't know what they would be. When I became the treasurer a few years later, I looked back at the previous 10 years of tax revenues for us and saw that with one or two exceptions, they increased constantly. So that I was the one that instituted a 10-year projection on tax revenue using just a simple straight lining from Excel's capabilities. We then have updated annually with regard to whether it has gone down a little bit or gone up. This last year, things went down a little bit because the previous year we had a big bump in unusual taxes. I forget. Claudine, help me. What do they call that on that line? Do you remember?
I don't know if you mean specific ownership.
No, it's not this. It's separate from that. But each year, I think it's recovering unpaid.
Oh, I see. What's on the
previous year.
valuation? Let me look that up while you guys are talking.
That's okay. It's not
Okay.
necessary. But anyway, there is a separate line that each year is a little different from what they're projecting that should be paid and received as they recover, or if there are certain expenditures out, like when we had to pay the YMCA back taxes. So sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, but the primary tax evaluation has consistently gone up with the exception of 1 year.
John,
So
taxes abated. I think you're looking.
abated.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So I still feel fairly strongly that we should be looking at our projections increasing what that basic property tax income would be using some kind of either formula or projection based on history.
John, you're referring to the major tax protests that the Y had that won their case and had some taxes abated, was a major bump. And the last year is what really threw me for a loop of the projections, but it stayed more stable than I thought it was going to be. And that's kind of the opinions we're going to be asking is, was this last year a major bump? Should we go with John's recommendation of a tool of gradually increasing revenues? What do folks think? Kay, on the finance, as a finance committee member, or maybe I'll go to you next.
Okay, I agree with John's approach of looking at historical information and making a determination. One question you said, John, there was 1 year that it actually went down. Was there anything that you saw, when like the 2017-18 recession? Because that
one we really didn't have much of an impact. It was the 2008 and 9.
Okay.
That was the real
Housing
drop that
thing.
the bigger drop at least that we had. I think what you were talking about 2017 area, it just kind of stayed flat.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there's I think in the next couple of years, I think it's very safe to say we should increase the revenues. We're seeing a boom, in the sale prices and the valuations that are coming through. We're also having a lot of building around here. What I'm reading is, they think that we're getting into a bubble and that there will be a crash, not a complete crash, but they just don't think that this will sustain it. No one knows when, but I do think we should have a year or two that reflects maybe some flat, just not keep increasing it. So maybe we could look at the historical and use that as a determining factor. And then we can always massage it a little bit, maybe a little bit more now, and then a couple of years of flat.
And there's certainly more sophisticated projections based on historical than the Excel version. It was simple to do, and it gave us more or less an idea. And as if you're looking at last year's that was done, 2019 was down just a little bit from 2018, which had a big jump up. And 2018 was one of those years we had a big abatement, extra funds come in from the state property tax, or the county, excuse me. And then it's flat from last year to this year pretty much. So
aren't valuations every other year?
yes, every 2 years.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And they're going out right now. And I've heard 8+% for a lot of people. David said 3. I had 5.55 increase. So it's all over the board, but it's all increases.
Right. I've had people say they've had a 30% increase with no changes to their house.
Yeah.
So
depends on how close they are to some of those houses that have sold.
the 2-year cycle, okay, that bubble could burst foreseeably in that time period too. So
Yeah.
we'll see on that. But thank you, Kay. It's really what we're looking for is kind of your feeling on the way things are going to go. And so I'm going to pass it to other board members and see, like Lynn, do you have any thoughts on this?
I don't think that, I agree with Kay that, we just need to factor in things that it will gradually increase. I don't think we can begin to second guess the exact cycle of it. When is it going to go up? When is it going to go down? But if we can look back historically at what has been sort of an average compounded increase over time, and for the purposes of a 10-year plan, figure that's realistic. I don't think we can get to the timing of, yeah, this is probably a bubble that will burst. But I just don't think we can get more specific than that. But I do think if the historical trend is that it goes up, that's what we should count on. At least
Okay.
for this purpose, as we budget year to year, we'll have a better sense of what's going on in the
Okay.
market.
Right. I might add, David, part of what we did back in 2013 was establish a long-term reserve as well. And that reserve was intended to carry us through any possible downturns. And so I think from the expense side and total, if you will, total revenue, where we can make up the revenue with some of that long term, if we have a bit of a downturn or flat, I think now's the time. It's at the stage where we could start accessing some of that, as long as we are very cautious with how much we would do that.
I think that's a good point, John, that we have that cushion for those volatile times. It was very, very good foresight to establish that long term. And I'm going to reiterate again what a pleasure it is to be having this discussion from the position of strength that the library is currently in. So, Pete, can I move to you and ask you what your thoughts are on this?
Well, I liked what Kay said and what you're saying too. I think the conservative, safe approach is the way to go. And I don't think we're in a position without leading indicators. Even if we had leading indicators, I'm not sure we could accurately portray when they would kick in. And we're in a resort community. I know we're part of Larimer County, but I think just a steady conservative growth is the way to go.
Okay. Bill.
I mean, even if we knew something, even if we know something's going to hit us, I'm not sure we could predict when, and that's all I was going to say.
Oh, I agree with that, Pete. If we could predict that, we would be doing that for much different source anyway. So, thank you, Pete. Bill, you have any thoughts on this?
No, I mean, just a historical point. I think that 10-year tool has been really wonderful, and I think Don's work in creating it, and then John's work in making substantial improvements, and it's made it much easier to formulate budgets and to move ahead and to feel confident. And I totally agree with what everybody's been saying about basically ignore what's going on right now with this jump in assessments and just keep the path going, because it could all pop and go back down again. And if we have a nice healthy reserve, then we can do what we're supposed to do, is make sure we have enough money to keep all of our staff and keep our great services going. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Anna, I'd also like to give you a chance to chime in if you would like to.
I'll unmute. I agree with what everyone's saying. I think historical context is really valuable, and I think that's kind of what we do with the foundation also in our attempts. So yeah, I just agree with that. Slow and steady.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question? Do you have a reserve
Sure.
policy? You have a reserve policy for the library?
We do, yes. And just briefly, there's like the short term is like a 3-month window. We have a capital fund also that has a base reserve of, I believe it's 100,000. Did we increase that to 200? It's 100,000. And then any excess over meeting those requirements go into the long-term reserve fund.
Okay, thanks.
So, and Susan, I'll also give you a chance to chime in if you have any comments.
Oh, thank you, but no comments.
Okay. Well, I think that's what we're looking for, is kind of a consensus of what I'm hearing from everyone, is to stay a little bit conservative and a steady pace and not worry so much about the short-term volatility of such sources. So thank you for that input. Things like the specific ownership tax is another thing. If you're not acquainted with that, that's the tax that you own when you license your vehicles, and it's that property tax that's assessed on. And
Did I freeze or did David freeze?
David froze.
Okay. See if he comes back on. If not, we may turn it back to you, Kay.
Okay. Wonder if he can hear us.
Probably not if he's actually frozen up.
Yeah.
Oh, well, he probably doesn't have his phone handy either.
No.
Darn, I was hoping for an explanation of specific ownership tax.
And I can't answer.
You can or can't?
I cannot.
Okay, I can.
Okay.
So, well, David's getting logged back on. Hopefully, he went off completely. I don't know if you can text it. Here he comes. Okay. Specific ownership. When you buy a car or you pay your car taxes, there's also a property tax associated with it. That's part of it. The specific ownership, boats, those kind of big item tickets typically make up the majority of specific ownership.
Thanks, John.
David, you're muted.
okay, can you hear me now?
And I gave a very brief, you locked up. So right when you started to explain specific ownership, I tried to carry on, but go ahead, please.
Oh, well, thank you, John. Yeah, I just had an internet problem and I switched over to a different source, so I should be okay now. So,
Okay.
and I was just ending, John, with my opinion is that I think it will continue at least steady, but it's hard to predict that it will increase hugely. But again, we'll deal with that a little bit as we come to it. It's hard to ask everyone's opinion on something like that.
Excuse me, I have a pretty strong opinion, as Claudine knows. Kieran and I used to fight over this every year when I was treasurer. He never wanted to increase it, but it kept going up and up every year. And it has continued to do that so far. So we finally started increasing it a little bit, but we're still, our estimates have always been less than what it actually comes in at. But it's a matter of a few $1,000s typically.
Right. That's why it's not a huge factor in our budget, but it's something we definitely have to consider in the plan. And I don't know at this point, we've had talks with the Friends and Foundation, and our current budget goes with those. But has there been any further talk about future projections with the Friends and Foundation? Susan or Ann, have you had much discussion on that?
We've started having conversations with John and Claudine, and I think our next meeting with them will be, and John has put out an ask, and so I think we're going to be talking about that in the next couple meetings. So.
Okay, well, you'll update us as information is available.
Oh, definitely, the report.
Okay, but is your opinion currently that we will stay steady with funding from the Friends and Foundation, or should our thinking be changed at all?
No, it will
This is
definitely
just
be,
a-
it will
This
be
is just an
steady.
opinion, Anna.
Yeah,
Yeah.
steady and maybe increasing. So yeah, so it's
Okay.
good. It's all good news. Yeah.
Okay, good to hear. But that's exactly the kind of thing that we need to complete this plan, as well as we can. So, okay, that's a good discussion on the income. Claudine, go ahead.
David, I made a big to-do about Cindy and I taking notes for context, but you opened up with such a great summary of where this all started in 2013, and I think it was very complete. I wanted to add 2 cents to it, which is in that process, the foundation paid for us, the library district, jointly with the foundation, to work with a financial planner. And that financial planner was primarily looking at what the tax revenue needed to be for us to operate for 10 years so that we could promise our citizens, our taxpayers, our voters, that we would not come back in 10 years. But I want to remind everyone that they included the Friends and Foundation, and from that process emerged the need for an executive director for the foundation. Okay, just wanted to let you know that was another, not only was the result what our mill levy rate needed to be, our ask to the public, but how the Friends and Foundation operated. So I just want to throw that out there as part of the history. And I also want you to know that is, although Don definitely was the lead, Don Bryson, in coming up with the 200,000 that would be projected revenue, in perpetuity from the Friends and Foundation, that was the goal of the financial planner. What does the Friends and Foundation produce? So I wanted to just remind Annie and Susan, we're so glad you're at this table because as far as I'm concerned, it's been like affirmation of the work that the board has done since 2013, the thinking and the planning. So here we are continuously growing. So David, that was more like a nickel. I meant for it to be pennies. Thank you.
No, very pertinent, Claudine, because I'm sorry, who?
That's me. May I ask
Go
a
ahead,
question about that 200,000? Is there an adjustment built in as the executive director salary goes up?
No.
There has not been to.
Not up to this, not to this point, but that's certainly a conversation that we are in the middle of.
Okay.
So that is
Thank
something
you.
that we're addressing. So it's come up. It came up last year. It's come up again this year. So we need to talk about it. So we are doing that.
Okay. But Claudine, that was a very pertinent update on that history, because that was a crucial decision to bring in. I think they termed it as a professional fundraiser at the time, whatever the term was, but it has sustained since that. And I for one, am really grateful at the planning that was done at that point, because it got us to this point right now. So
Thank you, David. And here I'll plug in Ray Nieder, previous trustee, who was truly the impetus for the conversation. So thank you to Ray, and then thank you to Don, and then thank you for the board.
Ray is a name I've seen quite often, but I never had the pleasure of meeting the gentleman. So, okay, that gives us, I think, some pretty good guidance on the income stream. As we discussed, the personnel will be discussed more by Pete and Claudine in the next meeting. But as was stated at the time, the consumer price index was used to decide on this 2% increase on the expenditures on things like collections. Is that still pertinent to just keep up with inflation? What's changed since that time? I mean, obviously, the libraries moved to digital collections more, and our digital collection is going to increase in cost more than just inflation. I know my software costs have certainly increased more than inflation. Factors like that are going to play into this. So again, we're going to go around the board and talk about what they see as their goals for the library, whether it's staying stable with things like collections, whether, if possible, like to see increases. Where should we go with that? And what kind of factors should we use in deciding this 10-year plan increases for things like that? Again, I'll start with you, John. You have the most experience on the board about this. So.
Well, I agree. I think the 2% was kind of a promise again made to the public with the mill levy increase, in that we recognized at that point staff had not received raises at all for something like 5 years, or if any had, they were very minor. Also, we had certain of the public that kept reminding us that we needed to buy more books. That's what we're about, is books.
I miss him to some extent. Sorry.
Yeah, good old Keith. Anyway, so that was part of it. Also, at that time, we were promising some increase in programming, specifically trying to reach older youth, teens. And so the immediately following years, we did try to implement some, and we've continued efforts there. So yeah, the collection issue certainly started out with the digital collection started out with that being primarily supported and funded from the Friends and Foundation. And we're taking that on now ourselves. And so there's certainly more than a 2% increase needed there. I agree. I think we need to ask Claudine and staff to provide us realistic actual numbers of where we should be going, and evaluate the overall increase based on their recommendations, more than telling them stay within a 2% increase. That'd be my view.
But you always provide a good historical perspective on that, John. Thank you. Maybe I'll just go kind of in the same order. Kate, would you like to chime in next?
Are you looking for just topics in general, or my input with regards to the collections?
In general, but you can be as specific as you feel you need to.
A couple other, collections is obviously something. I think we have to look at our maintenance schedule and incorporate that into our 10-year plan. I think we have to, as mentioned, the programming. I also think we have to look at some of our property improvements that may be associated with either, programs or just anticipated above and beyond just maintenance. I think, the meeting structure that we were trying to do by the fireside is an example, what I consider a property improvement. So those are some things I think we need to look at. I hate to throw it back at Claudine, but we really are going to need your input for those kinds of things.
Some of the decision on that, Kay, though, would be the scale of funds needed. Some things can be accomplished within our budget, and some things may need a capital campaign.
Correct.
So we'll need to differentiate a little bit with that. So, but
correct.
As always, Claudine, your input is going to be central to these things. A staff request for such possible changes. So, anything further, Kay? Was that?
Those are the kind of the highlights that I had.
But in your opinion, should we be using, as in the past, a flat 2% rate, or look at varying, as John said, based on input from the staff on what their needs? Because last year has shown that at times they were, even scrambling to spend their budget, let alone over it. So
right.
Go ahead.
I guess I almost take last year and just say, it's such an anomaly. We just don't even look at that. I think, what John from a historical standpoint said, that it wasn't necessarily a 2% growth on the money spent, but of the number of books. Is that correct, John?
No, it was financial. It was
okay.
2% increase in the budget for books and materials. Yeah.
Okay. The only thing I would say with that then is we might need to factor up a little bit because of digital cost. They are more. And I
Okay.
would believe that that's a trend we're going to see going forward.
Okay.
With regard to maintenance, again, we have a schedule. We'll just look at that and plug that in. Whether it's property improvement or enhancement or even programming, those are the areas that I look at and say, after we get done with the infrastructure, then what is left and how can that be applied? And we do have some nice reserves. So if there's a particular program or improvement that we want, especially if it's like a one-time thing, we can always look at those reserves as an option. But it would be nice to see when that could potentially be hitting what year.
A very good point, and that's part of what the 10-year plan is intended to provide, is maybe after getting with a basic structure, what may be available for additional projects and stuff. So
exactly.
Okay.
And if I may, David, I think on some of those categories, that's what Claudine and I'll be talking with Annie and Sarah and Susan about, as far as potential areas for going out and funding from the Friends and Foundation. So some of those are one-offs, if you will, and not ongoing. And so a particular year might have some of those, not technically capital, but they're improvements, or there's very significant building maintenance kinds of things. Like a few years ago, we replaced, was it 2 or 3 of the HVACs? So, 3, yeah. So those are big expenditure items that I think are more or less one-off, that we hope to talk with the Friends and Foundation and see if those are appropriate or not for them to try to fundraise for. Sorry.
Which is why having a great relationship with the Friends is a good thing for us. So I think we went to Lynn next, if you have any thoughts on these subjects.
Yeah, I think again, I guess it goes back to staff feedback and making sure that the emphasis in where we're maybe growing more or less ties to the strategic initiatives. If, for example, if we've said we want to be focusing on early literacy, for example, we need to make sure that the budget reflects that. And maybe as we build up the expenses to those line items, we should be looking for maybe more increases in those areas, whether it's Spanish language, whether it's early literacy, and make sure that those strategic goals are driving where the emphasis is in the growth in spending.
Okay.
I don't know how to get to that without a lot of input from the staff. And I don't know how much, I mean, in the 10-year plan, is collections just one line item?
It's spread out over a few line items for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I would have,
Okay. So
several
I guess
several categories between youth and adult in each. So yeah, there's lots of different line items that include that.
And I think Kay said this before, that the electronic books may tend to be more expensive, and we need to allow for that when we think about collections.
well, and with the input so far, let me ask you a question, Claudine. I agree. It's absolutely imperative to get the staff input about the direction, but how timely can we get that kind of input to complete plans like this? I mean, we have no set date for having this completed. We just want to get it completed. But can we get staff input for direction in a relatively timely manner?
Let me think about that, David. The reason why I don't have a clear answer is we just onboarded our new supervisors on Friday. And then our third supervisor and administrator, Curtis, leave in December. And these are not excuses. I hope you can correct me offline if you think it is. getting the momentum where we have the good patterns, where I guess the chicken and the egg are in the right order. COVID threw everything off. So I just need to make sure, can we do that? Because we're really operating off of a 3-year plan. We're operating off of a 1-year right now. I'd like to back up 1 second to ask Lynn and maybe Kay a question, if I may, David.
Sure.
So this is rather old-fashioned budgeting between the staff and the governing board. But everything you're saying makes sense to me, as I know the 10-year plan is going to need some granular data, right, to be of value. With that said, I'm a little hesitant to think about it as 2%, 4% increases. I'm wondering if instead it would be a greater governance level budgeting conversation to say, every year after we've taken off 10% for capital improvement or maintenance or what have you, for the reserve funds, 15% goes to materials, 8% goes to programming, and that way there's a bit more liberty for the staff to accomplish, to hit those metrics. And then Lynn, your point about how do we know that how do we make the budget reflect prioritization of our strategic objectives? I think that's where I would want to pull out from those percentages. Okay, so if and I'm making these numbers up. If 15% goes to, did I say materials? 15% goes to materials, great. Then it's up to me to pull out, if early literacy, equitable services and so on are our priorities, I pull those out for you guys to see that we're putting even extra in. So I may be too far in the weeds, David, but I'm trying to figure out how to make this something that the board can really massage, but that allows it to stay at the governance level. I hope that it wasn't too derailing.
No, that makes sense.
Go ahead.
John, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. I strongly agree. I think that we are at the point, and what we've tried to use this for, and why we have developed it in May and June, well in advance, the 10-year plan, well in advance, it was to give the overall direction to Claudine and staff. This is what you're going to have. You work out the new budget. And we just had said, as you've indicated, 2% overall, and where that 2% went, whether it was salaries or books or whatever, we gave general kind of directions that we thought we ought to keep increasing our expenditure on materials. But, what we're trying to do with this plan, remember, is give direction to staff so they come back with a strategic plan operationally. This is our strategic direction from governance as to this is what you have to work with. So I don't think we want to be telling staff line by line, this is the increase, this is the decrease or whatever. And personally, I think that we should be at the point with the kind of reserves we have that we could be looking at zero balance on the budget. So if we have an income of 2.3 million, then 2.3 million could be the expenditure budget instead of planning to continue to increase those reserves. There's nothing wrong, certainly, if we end up, and I will say this, in the 10 years that I've been involved so far, maybe more than that. Anyway.
12, but I'm not counting.
Okay. Claudine has, I think, only 1 year with some very exceptional expenditures overspent the expense budget where we had to do a supplemental. We did a supplemental the year before last in 2019, but we ended up, we really didn't need it.
Right.
Only 1 year was it actually necessary and needed. She and her staff have always done an excellent job of staying within what we say, this is your expense budget. And every year we have had reserves that we could move into those reserves and get us to a point where right now we are very healthy financially. And I think we need to really consider whether or not we give them direction that the revenue projection can be met with the same kind of expense budget. Sorry,
Okay.
I took too much time.
No, John, very all pertinent stuff. And before
I would
moving
like
on
to add something to that thought. John, I hear what you're saying completely. I think one of the purposes, though, of a 10-year budget is helping, if decisions are made, what are the implications down the road, year after year after year? One of the things I think that we're going to be looking at is compensation. If we do, let's say, significant compensation changes, that's not a one-time change. That's a factor that applies over and over and over. If it takes up a significant amount of our annual revenues, then we need to know that, because if it gets to the point that a huge percent is just on compensation and we're going to suffer on programs and maybe some significant improvements, then that's a discussion that this 10-year plan should reveal. And yes, we have revenues, but if we rely on those revenues year after year after year for any special projects, programming, those kinds of things, it's going to be gone. So the whole purpose of a 10-year plan is to look and say, if we make these assumptions, what are the implications down the road? And I agree, we don't want to do a budget and anticipate, we're doing a budget for 10 years. That's not what this is about, but it is to put it in some significant categories, and that we want to be able to do programming, special projects, whatever, what money is there after we do our basics. So.
Agreed, wholeheartedly, but salary certainly is the biggest bucket to begin with, and we may be looking at increasing it somewhat significantly. Again, we have the funds that I believe we can do that. Some of these other programs are 2, 3, 4 years and probably pretty flat as far as the amount of expenditures involved in those programs, rather than them increasing in amounts, and then may go away and be replaced with
something
some other
else.
program. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
all good discussion points. Let me give Pete a chance to give any thoughts he might have on this.
Thanks. I met with Claudine today, and so I agree with what Kay's saying. I think I could be wrong. Jump in here, Claudia, if I'm overstating, but I think the biggest part of our budget being labor, we are in for some change. We are going to recommend some changes, and it's not necessarily going to be drastic changes as much as it's going to be maintenance. It's going to be proactive salary administration based on data points, and rather than kind of guessing. I'm not saying we're you know what I mean. My objective would be to avoid major adjustments every 3 or 4 years and just be steady, aligned with the data we have. Once everybody agrees that we have the right data and a process, implement it, and it'll be better for employee retention and morale and everything, and we'll have a better confidence that we're doing the right thing now that we've engaged a firm to help us with studies. So you'll hear more about that next month. I don't think I'm qualified this early to talk about collections and things like that, but I do feel I'm qualified to talk about the biggest piece of the budget, which is going to be labor. And I hope that we can clear that up over the next couple of months, so that going forward, while it might be an increase in a particular year compared to what we have used in the 10-year plan, you won't have big adjustments and surprises down the road. That's about all I have. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, yes, Pete, and I agree. It makes a lot of things easier to deal with if we have a predictable pattern of increases in the salaries you're talking about. So thank you for doing that work on that, and we'll look forward to getting more in depth on that on the next meeting.
Yeah, and our intent isn't going to be to give away the bank. You know, our intent is to be fair and create a process that the board can believe in and the employees can believe in and trust. So that's it.
Okay, that sounds very good. So we'll get into that more in the next meeting. Bill, I'll move to you.
There's so much wisdom here. I'm not quite sure what I can add to it. A tiny point, don't forget collections is a very small proportion of the budget. You could double the amount for collections and it's still not all that much money compared to even the next major expenditure item. Also, I think the 10-year plan, have you ever seen a steam engine running, but has this little whirling thing that's the governor to make sure that the engine doesn't go too fast. It's too much of a load on it. And I think that's kind of what the 10-year plan is, to make sure that we stay straight and steady. And like Kay was saying, watch out for the things that could be investments that will be very demanding in coming years. And I think that the interplay of ideas between John's ideas and Kay's ideas, that's really a fruitful interaction to have, I think.
Absolutely. I think that was the whole point of this discussion, was to bring out exactly those type of topics. So, Anne, any thoughts on your part?
I just wanted to briefly circle back to what John said. The 10-year strategic plan is great for us because it provides us with, do we need to do a capital campaign? What does the so I think it's a good framework for us also. Okay. I think John said it very well. I don't need to repeat it. So.
Okay, very good. And Susan, I'll give you an opportunity also if you have any input. Okay, great. Well, I will tell you that I think that with what you said, and I thought that was, Bill, this is the kind of discussion that as a finance committee, we really wanted to hear. We wanted not only to make sure that you were informed of our processes, but also that you had an opportunity to input on how we prepare this. So, Kay, any final thoughts before we kind of close this discussion?
Just the thing that we talked about is we want to put together just one option, one 10-year plan, not have many options. And that's part of why we wanted this discussion, so that we could get the input. So when we applied it, everyone felt comfortable with that. And we didn't want to say, oh, go back and do this. I mean, that doesn't mean we can't tweak it, but we're working with one document. And that's our goal this year.
And that's a good point. A year ago, things were so, shall we say, topsy-turvy. We really didn't know how to handle it. And I think we have a better handle on it now. So, Claudine, do you have any final thoughts you want to put on?
Thank you, David. I am still trying to visualize what this spreadsheet is telling me and telling you. So you'll forgive me if I slow the board down. I loved your opening. It was so contextual, and it reminded me that the original plan for the 10 years was, can we promise the public we won't come back in 10 years? But we were so successful that John, I think it was under your charge as treasurer, we turned it into a rolling 10-year plan because we realized we could keep going. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that. So David, I think the finance committee something I'd like to ask is if it would be appropriate that maybe the finance committee reconvene and we reflect back what we heard, so that the board can hear the assumptions we've gathered, and then we turn those assumptions into the frame of the spreadsheet, because I think it would help me to, now that Don's not here, John, I'm allowed to say curbs. For reasons I don't understand, Don Bryson did not like it when I used curbs, that by the board placing curbs, I can operate with my team within those curbs. So curb. I know the policy does a lot of that work, but I think this 10-year plan frame will help me further. So I'm sorry that maybe I missed a few points, but Mr. Treasurer, I'm hoping that the iterative process continues after today.
I think that's a good idea, and I'm agreeable. Kay, we can meet again here soon and kind of reflect on this.
Sure.
I think that's a good idea. And Claudine, I will tell you that I prefer curb cuts.
Thank you.
So thank you all for your input on this. I think this was a very valuable discussion for us as a finance committee. And I think we accomplished some of our goals with this. So we've been at it for a while. I want to give Kay a chance to kind of update the board on discussions that we've had in finance committee and research that Cindy has done on our investment options.
Okay, real quick. I mean, you've heard us talk about it over and over, how fortunate we are that we have reserves. And everyone, I think, is aware that the interest rates are just pitiful. If not, just look at our last statement. So we're looking, the finance committee has been looking for options, and we are very restrictive on how our investments can be directed. But is it Cowell Trust? Is that right, Cindy?
Cowell Trust.
Cowell Trust. Okay. They came out and introduced a new product. It's basically government securities that raised interest. And so we talked about it, and Cindy went back and asked for additional information. And there's still some gaps. For instance, they haven't been able to tell us if or what the fee structure is going to be.
Oh.
They don't have experience, so they can't tell us what their revenue generation is. So we felt as a group that there was too many unknowns at this point to recommend putting some of our revenues, our reserves in that tool. What we will do is, over time, as they get experience, monitor it. Hopefully more of our questions will be answered, and at a future time, we may come back and say, we recommend this. But on an interim basis, we thought maybe to just generate a little more income, we could look at some CDs, and they would be short-term, which I would define as less than or equal to a year. And it would not be the complete reserves. It would be just a portion of them, and we would do them staggered. So if we were working on a special project or we needed some of these funds, we wouldn't have to wait for a year, that there should be something coming up. And we're going to be doing research on what those options are and what kind of rate of return we can get, and we will present it to the full board. But I think at this point, that's going to be the avenue we take. Any questions?
I think that's great.
Well,
I'm glad you're looking at some of those kinds of options, and I would agree that CDs, I guess I would say that maybe even up to 3-year kinds of CDs for some portion, if it's a relatively smaller portion of it, because we have such large amount in the long-term reserve.
The problem of locking into a 3-year right now is the returns are so low.
Okay.
It is anticipated that in a 3-year period, they probably are going to increase.
Yeah.
And so to lock in for 3 years now, I don't think it's just makes sense when we're so low. If we were really looking at some good returns, I'd say, yeah, let's consider it, but not yet.
The main factor we're looking at all of this is to make sure that there's liquidity for current uses, and the Cowell Trust Fund is the best vehicle for the liquidity. And when we look at the reserve funds, as Kay stated, it will only be a portion, and it will be staggered to make sure that there is available funds as come. But the worst case scenario with CDs is you have to forfeit a little interest and penalty or something like that, yeah, if there is some kind of emergency. But the main factor will make sure that we have the liquidity needed for operations. Claudine, you kind of answered Pete. If you want to, Pete, you did a message there about professional fundraiser. I don't think I saw the whole question.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt anybody with that. I just wanted to, there was a reference about when the 10-year plan was developed back in 2013. I thought there was a reference to a professional fundraiser hired,
Uh,
or is that wrong?
Claudine, no, go ahead, Claudine.
Thanks, David. Peter, now I better understand your question. It was the recommendation of the financial consultant after the process, and the financial planning process involved the board of trustees, members of the foundation board, and key members of staff. So I just wanted to give you that context too, to say the outcome was someone to fundraise, not as a fundraiser, as I think we think at the corporate level, but as a development director. And we can talk about the difference between that in a moment. The main part, Pete, which kind of brings me back to Lynn's question about, hey, have we been thinking about the increasing costs to operating salary for Friends and Foundation relative to their gift to the library annually? And I'll tell you, I think it stood the test of time, but both Bob Dickinson, who's been a bit of a consultant for us, and it was Mark Holt, who we hired with the foundation, said essentially for every dollar raised by the development director, it should cost the Friends and Foundation 25 cents. And that doesn't happen overnight. That takes years to get to that frequency. And again, I want to admit, Lynn and Pete, that was information I received in 2013. My knowledge is that is an enduring ratio, but I hope that gives you some context as to what we learned through that process.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. And
John, you were in the room. You can correct anything. Go ahead.
No, that's exactly right. And what we did initially with the foundation was hire a development director. The foundation boards typically have not been fundraisers to the extent that a lot of people thought that members of the board should be. And that was part of the direction from that advisor that suggested we actually needed a professional to participate and lead at least that, and not just us amateurs on the board. No inference there to the current board.
Well, and my other comment was just it was completely different topic. It was I was just trying to add in there that I agree, if I was hearing it right, I agree with the notion of delegating down how to spend the money within the broad buckets in the line items, and getting input from wherever it's appropriate. In a lot of cases, the staff. And I was just saying that that's fantastic, but we have to be able to manage expectations on, this big pot of money we have has to cover a lot of things, and some people don't see that. They see their particular projects as the most important. And I agree, Claudine, that what you're saying is that's your job, and that's all. Yeah, I agree 100%. I just thought I'd throw that comment out there.
Yeah, and I guess I would re-emphasize, I think I may have said it earlier, so I'll apologize for repeating myself, but this as a plan, it's not a budget. We're giving, and why we do it now is we're trying to give some direction for Claudine to give direction to staff and develop an actual budget. When we get the August estimate from the county on our revenues, this should be updated with that information for her before she gives us that first draft budget. So this is just a first pass, if you will, how we did last year and how things actually came out versus what our projections were and our budgets, so that there's an initial direction here. This is the kind of pot of money you're going to have, we think, and then we'll update it in August. And of course, finalize it with the budget when we pass it in December.
Great. Thank you.
But in the interim, we will also have discussions in October when Claudine presents the preliminary budget. It'll be our guidance whether the budget presented meets the strategic goals. That will be our job to decide that Claudine's budget is meeting those. So, but I agree completely. It's up to staff to come up with the priorities needed, present them to us, and we agree or disagree, and go from there. So, all good points. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions? Kay, thank you for that synopsis. It kind of sounds like we're holding, but it is something that will be ongoing research. Thank you, Cindy, for what you do to inform us on that. But I think it's a crucial part of our job as Finance Committee to monitor that and move forward on that too. So I will open up to any further comments before I pass it back to John. I think we've been at it numbers long enough for right now. So John, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, David and Kay, for leading us on this and the input that staff gave as well for that committee. So hopefully the June study session where we'll talk more about that really big ticket item that's part of our budget, the staff salaries and benefits. I hope you're looking at the benefit side there too a little bit. If not, well, we'll get some updates on that, I'm sure, before the next year's budget comes. Anyway, I appreciate everybody's participation and the preparations, and I have nothing else. Claudine, I'll give you a last chance. Anything?
I just, at the risk of seeming a little too brown nosy, David, Kay, thank you for taking the lead on this. It's a pleasure for Cindy and I can speak for Cindy because we talked in advance. It is really terrific to work with a finance committee that is so forward thinking and paying attention to the detail. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, Claudia.
I think the board's very fortunate to have the folks on the finance committee doing this kind of work. And with that, I believe we can adjourn the study session at